story about on the song that we played. What was it? Like, Great Are You, Lord? So like back home before I left for the military and everything, I used to dance to that song, like TikTok dances. And so whenever that song came on today, like that's all I wanted to do was TikTok dance, but someone didn't let me do that. I'm not gonna say any names, but it was Jacob. But anyways.
I saw you
I know, like that was like my song I just love TikTok dancing to. Okay, so if you guys want to, y'all can go ahead and go out to Acts chapter 21. It's a pretty big chapter, and there's like a lot of things that like just stuck out to me that like maybe didn't necessarily need to stick out to me, but it did, and I like dove way too deep into it. But I think it's really important for us to dig deep whenever it's the Holy Spirit like really pounding on you to do it. But anyways, we'll start in verse 1. All right. So, and when we had parted from them and set sail, we came by a straight course to Kos, and the next day to Rhodes, and from there to Parta. And having found a ship crossing to, that's a big word, Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. And I'm just gonna put it out there, I might mispronounce a lot of words wrong, but it's okay. We might just give nicknames to the big words. Yeah, and we'll just know what it means. But when we had come inside of Cyprus, leaving it on the left, we sailed to Syria and landed at Tyre. For there the ship was to unload its cargo. And having sought out the disciples, we stayed there for 7 days. And though they were telling Paul not to go on to Jerusalem, when our days there were ended, we departed and went on our journey, and they all, with the wives and children, accompanied us until we were out of the city. And kneeling down on the beach, we prayed and said farewell to one another. Then we went on board the ship, and they returned home. So just to start off, so this is Paul leaving the Ephesian elders, and it was kind of like a hard goodbye for him, because like the Ephesian elders like had a really big place in Paul's heart, because like the Ephesian church was like kind of like his baby. Like he spent a lot of time there, and he really was just there helping them out a lot. So it was like a hard goodbye, and then they went on this entire trip, like finding boats and finding everything, because Paul in his heart's feeling like he needs to go to Jerusalem. But everyone keeps telling Paul, don't go. And we see like the people that he stayed with were walking him out to the city, and that's like a normal thing back then, was like walking their guest over to like the edge of the city. But what was uniquely Christian was them sitting and praying. Like that was very weird for that time. And it was like, I guess they could have gotten in trouble, like being a different religion from others, or it could have been awkward. Someone could have like been talking about them or anything like that. All of those things that pop up. Because I know sometimes when I go out to restaurants, it gets a little awkward when I pray in front of other people, but it's also like that. It's okay to be uncomfortable for other people sometimes, like not to be like mean about it, like don't purposely be uncomfortable towards people, but it's okay to live out your religion and live out your relationship with Christ if it makes other people uncomfortable just a little bit. Because Christ puts a lot of uncomfortable stuff in our lives too. But anyways, so we just see them uniquely like praying and saying goodbye and doing all of this thing. But I think it's really important to point out that there is a lot of like Christians, like no one knows how the Church of Tyre got started. We just know that Christianity has been spreading around a lot. And we don't really know the background information of all of it, but we know that it's spreading. So if we just go back to verse 7, it says, when we had finished the voyage from Tyre, we arrived to Pemias, and we greeted the brothers and stayed with them for 1 day. And the next day we departed and came to Caesarea, and we entered the house of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. While we were staying for many days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea, and coming to us, he took Paul's belt and bound his own feet and hands and said, thus says the Holy Spirit, this is how the Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles. When we heard this, we and the people there urged him not to go to Jerusalem. And so on this is where it really stuck at me. So we talk about Philip the evangelist having 4 daughters. That was great information, but why did they put that in there, Like, the daughters didn't prophesy. They didn't say, hey, Paul, this is what's going to happen. It was Agabus who came down and told Paul. So we see these 4 daughters, and it really bothered me, because I was like, why did the writer want us to know that he had 4 daughters who all prophesied? And so I, dug way too deep in it, hardcore deep. And then so I even texted Rafer because I was like, because I really wanted to make the connection. I really wanted Paul the evangelist to be the same, or Philip the evangelist be the same Philip the apostle, and they just weren't. But so I looked in deeper, and I was like, so Philip the evangelist was at Sisera, and in Sisera, that was the tribe of Asher. And the tribe of Asher was described, so like back then the tribes were described by like the characteristics and like how the founder was all described. And so we know that Philip the evangelist, he was described as energetic and happy, like inclusive, super great and nice and like just inclusive and super energetic. And that was exactly how the tribe of Asher was described too. So 1,000 years before, in the same area where he's at, the tribe of Asher, that was their land, was described, the founder and everything was described just how Philip the evangelist was years later at that same area. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. And so then I even looked back into it. So there is, let me find it right quick. So in verse 9, there's like a little tiny A right in between. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. So in that A, I went back and it was in, let me find it. I think it was Luke 2:36. Let me see. And then we're talking about another prophet, which was Anna. She was the daughter of Phanuel, who was also of the tribe of Asher. So the tribe of Asher was the location. The tribe of Asher was the other female prophet that they all went back to in this verse. And I was like, okay, so what is God trying to show me with all of these things, like circling this energetic prophet with 4 daughters? Like, why does that even apply to me? And so then I kind of like just stopped looking at it because I wasn't getting anywhere. So I took like 2 days off of it, and I was like, well, I guess I'll figure it out somehow. And so like I was just driving in my car, and I was just like, wow, that kind of makes sense. Like an idea just popped in my head, and it was like, God chose 4 women. There's another female prophet in earlier chapters in Luke. And I was like, oh, Jesus and God, they all use women. Christianity is not just a man's religion. It's not just an old person religion. It's not just a young person religion. It's an everybody's vertical relationship. And I was just like, oh, so if Jesus is calling me to do something, even though I'm a female, even though my race or my status in life or my age, like just because I'm super young doesn't mean I can't do what God's calling me to do. Even if I'm super old, it's not that God's not calling me to do it. Even though I'm like probably done with everything, I want to be done with all of this thing, because that's how we feel. It's like, man, I'm already old, so why am I going to start something new? Or that just doesn't fit for me because I've already established something here. If God's calling you to do something, it doesn't matter if you're, a female or a male or anything like that. It's just God's calling you to do it. He's finding you to just call you to do it and live out your faith and live out your life. It's just that soft thing that He's always going to just call you to do. Okay, so let's go back to it. And then in verse 12, when we heard this, we and the people there urged him not to go up to Jerusalem. So this wasn't the first time someone told Paul not to go to Jerusalem. So they keep on telling Paul not to go multiple times. So then Paul answered, "What are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart for? For I am ready not only to be in prison, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." And since he would not be persuaded, we ceased and said, "Let the will of the Lord be done." So we see another time, Paul's like, it's okay, we're going to die. If I'm going to die for Jesus, that's okay, because Jesus died for us. So the least I can do is die for Jesus, really. And so right there in verse 14, there's like a little J right beside the "we ceased." So that was going back all the way to Ruth. And it was because Ruth told everybody, like, I have to go help my mother-in-law, like, even though I don't have to, I need to. And so let me go back to Ruth right quick. Let me try and find the page. Because, like, when I read it, I was like, well, that's kind of crazy, because Ruth is my favorite. Okay, so it's going to be Ruth 1:18. All right, so it says, And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So Ruth was like, I'm going to go with Naomi. I don't care what you're going to say. I'm still going to go with you. Just how Paul was like, hey, I'm still going to go to Jerusalem. I don't care what you're going to say. I'm still going to go. And so it's like they made that reference all the way back to Ruth. And I was like, okay, Jesus, that's pretty cool. But I just think it's really respectful because, like, Agabus didn't tell Paul, like, it was God's will to him not go to Jerusalem, because if Paul would have listened to Agabus, then he would be going against God's will and against what God's calling him to be doing. And, like, in hindsight, what if he would have? Like, what if he would have, like, yeah, that's a little scary, that's a little dangerous, I'm just not going to go. What would that have meant for the rest of us all these years later? Like, what would that have taught us all these years later? But Paul didn't. He was just like, it's okay, whatever happens, happens. I know I'm going to be protected by the Lord and I'm going to be good because this is what he's calling me to do. So after these days, we got ready and went up to Jerusalem. And some of the disciples from Sisera went with us, bringing us to the house of Mason of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we should lodge. And I thought it was weird that they put lodge in there because, like, lodging, I just think is comfortable. So I just thought it was a funny word that they chose for that. But all of his friends just went and wanted to support him, knowing that they had the potential themselves to getting hurt and kicked and imprisoned or killed and all that good stuff. So back to verse 17. When we had come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified God. And they said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews of those who have believed. They are all zealous for the law. And they have been told about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to our customs. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. Do therefore what we tell you. All right, so we'll stop right there. So we see that Paul finds out his reputation here and what everyone's in Jerusalem's kind of telling about him. So they all just assume that Paul just forsakes and, like, forgets all of the Jewish laws. That it's like, oh, it's not that important because I'm a Christian now, so I don't have to follow those laws. But Paul never said that. Paul always did what he needed to do to get to Jesus. He himself even took a vow earlier in Acts because he needed to get himself to Jesus too, and just, like, have that promise. So the Christians were still, like, having that Jewish background. So the law was still very important and it was still very prominent. And so for them to just come up and see that Paul wasn't supposed to be against the law, it was just really big. And, like, why would you do that? So do therefore what we tell you. So back to verse 23. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take these men and purify yourselves along with them and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself also live in observance of the law. But as for the Gentiles who have believed, we have sent a letter with our judgment that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols and from blood and from what has been strangled and from sexual immorality. Then Paul took the men, and the next day he purified himself along with them, and went into the temple, giving notice when the days of purification would be fulfilled, and the offering presented for each one of them. So Paul does exactly what the pastor, or like what the religious elders are telling him to do, what the Christian leaders are telling him. It's like, just go and be with these guys, host, or like promote it and be there and support these guys as they make a vow. You yourself can make the vow, but and just show that you're not anti-Jewish. You don't have to do all these things to get to Jesus. But if they help you to get to Jesus, then I'm going to do them with you. Like, that's really cool. And so Paul is, like, just doing what they're telling them to do, because, like, to me, I think it's funny. Like, they think that he's such a hypocrite, but he's like, I'm just trying to teach y'all about Jesus and love y'all, and y'all are just trying to pigeonhole all these things, which y'all can't. And the only things that they're making up is lies about him, and to try and make him look like he's not who he says he is and what his mission is to do. So after everything's done, they go back into the temple. So in verse 27, It says, when the 7 days were almost complete, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him. And this sounds a lot like how the other chapters are. The whole entire crowd comes up and tries to stir up some trouble, and they don't even know what they're talking about. And then more people come, and they don't even know what they're talking about. And it just becomes terrible. So the whole crowd had laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, help. This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against the people and the law in this place. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into this temple and has defiled this holy place, for they had previously seen," a big word, Timas, yep, big T, with the Ephesian with him in the city. And suppose that Paul had brought him into the temple. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. So now we see them all pounding on Paul because he's bringing all these people to the temple. And I just think it's mind-blowing to think that back then it's normal. It's a normal life, normal day, just bringing someone from the temple and just going to beat them up. Because I'm what if, I'm sure that happens across the world, but it's just imagine going to church one day and someone just doesn't like your face or just doesn't like you. And they're me and you are going to have it outside after church. We're going to go. And I just think it's just so wild that everyone, it's everybody that does it. It's not just one person that has the problem. It's everybody that has the problem. I think it's crazy. So back to it in 31. And as they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. He at once took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. So now the Roman soldiers are coming, and everyone's we got to stop the laws here. They can't see me breaking the law and making all this mess. So then the tribune came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd were shouting one thing, some another. And as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. And when he came to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd, for the mob of the people followed, crying out, "Away with him." The "away with him" didn't mean "away with him, get him out of my face." It meant take him off of this earth, let's kill this man, I don't want to see him anymore. And that's way different than "away with him, get him out of my face." That's "away with him, get him out of this whole entire earth." But the whole reason the soldier wants to take Paul out is because they want to keep order. I think this soldier probably wanted to keep a little bit of pride for himself, oh, I can handle a crowd. I'm a leader, I can handle the crowd. And so that's what I kind of felt like. He feels like he can do it, even though it looks like he can't do it, because everyone's just so crazy. And even one minute, let me go back. But yeah, he wanted to take him out so there could be order, so that they could put Paul on trial, even though there was nothing that he was doing. So he wanted to take him out of that violence. So back to...
Even the crowd wasn't able to do it. Half of the crowd was saying this, and the other half was saying that.
So he couldn't even get the story straight.
They don't even know what they're saying. They're saying he's bad because
Yep.
they had to do it.
I think it's just so funny because we see that all the time now on social media. Someone can put an innocent picture up and then someone's well, that color is yellow. And then I could come and be no, that color is lime green. And then we all just start battling over it. And then the Facebook police comes on and they're just take the post down. Just take the post down. And I just think it's so funny now.
That's so true. I remember last year, there was a pastor who put up a quote by somebody. And I remember Rayford commented, and he was that person didn't say that quote. It's been fact checked already. And so just so you know, this is just false. It's just something to prove what you feel, but it's not real. And the pastor was but still, and it was to be really aware of just what the crowd and what we can get people to believe by what we say when it may not even be facts, or believing things that we don't even know the facts actually ourselves. It's crazy.
And another thing I thought was just wild is that they had to give him 2 chains like to carry him. And I'm like, Paul was already probably like beaten up pretty bad, like considering how many people are in this city. Like there's no, like he's not a threat. He was never a threat in the beginning. He just went to the temple because he had to do this cleansing with all his friends, and then they came back, beat him up, and put chains on him. The only reason people really put handcuffs on you are to not make you a threat, to get what they need you to do. And they put them on Paul because they had to move him. And I just think that's so wild. So anyways, back to 37. As Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" And he said, "Do you know Greek? Are you not the Egyptian who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out of the wilderness?" And Paul replied, "I am a Jew from Taurus in Sicilia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people." And when you have given him permission, Paul standing on the steps, let's just stop right there. Because the big thing is he asked permission to speak to the crowd. He asked permission to like the guy thought that he was a terrorist. He thought he was like some rando off the street, like off in the wilderness, like nobody. But he was surprised because he had all of this education. Like he knew how to speak, like he had an education. He spoke with the Greek culture, so because that was what the Romans were familiar with. So like he knew how to connect with these people. And I just think that's really big because like for someone to be that like mentally like not okay because of he just got like busted up outside, like he's like having this educational conversation, and it's like I just have to say something to these people. And what is on his mind and on his heart is just sharing the gospel, which we'll see more in chapter 22. But like the same thing that's about, like just got him beaten up is the same thing that he's going to go outside and talk to everybody about. Is I just love Jesus and you guys should too. So back to verse 40, it says, "And when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the steps, motioned with his hand to the people. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in Hebrew language." And then it's like a cliffhanger, like. And I think it's crazy because he then, after addressing the Romans in Greek, he then addressed the people in Hebrew, which was a common language, which would make him feel like he's one of them. So then the people who just got done beating them up is going to feel, oh, we can connect with this guy because he speaks the same language. He is one of us, so we can trust him. That's what you would like to think. But I think it's amazing just seeing how there's like just so many like tiny details that we can just skim over because we're like, oh, I don't really need to know Acts because Acts isn't that big of a story in my life because there's just so many parts to it. But we see Acts, and we see in this chapter specifically, we see a lot of what happened to Jesus and what happened to Paul. And I wrote them all down. So it was like Jesus traveled to Jerusalem, Paul traveled to Jerusalem. Jesus had opposition from a hostile group. Paul had hostile from a different group. Jesus, people planned against his life. Paul also, they planned against his life. They had received successful predictions of their upcoming sufferings in Jerusalem, including being handed to the Gentiles. They had followers who discouraged him going to Jerusalem. They declared readiness to lay down their life. They were unjustly arrested alone. Like none of their friends were arrested with them. Like they were just on their own, both Jesus and Paul. And they both felt like they had to give something to Jerusalem. And there is a mob mentality for both of them. And they had to determine to complete ministry and not be deflected from it. So they both had in their heart, they had to complete their ministry. They had to do it because it was in their heart. It was what God was calling them both to do. And I think that a lot of us limit ourselves because it's like, well, my life can't look like that because I'm not good enough. Going back to the verse of it's like, it's the 4 female daughters. It's like, God can use you even though you might feel like you are not worth it, or you're not qualified to do it, or you're broken and you don't have the tools to fix it. God does multiple times, and we see this over and over. And it's just amazing that people limit themselves because it's like my walk with Christ can't look like anybody else's because I'm made uniquely. But it's really big to notice that when your walk does start looking similar to Christ, you're like, wow, I'm really walking with Christ. Because there's been times in my life where I'm like, oh man, I'm just going through it and I'm just walking, and then things start making sense and everything kind of comes together and it's connecting, and it's like, wow, this kind of looked how Jesus looked when he was in the wilderness. Like when I was in boot camp, I felt like I was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. I was hungry, I was scared, I cried a lot, and I was just like, Jesus, I just don't know what I did to get myself here. But over and over, I just kept reading, and Jesus was like, you're going to be okay. Other people have done it before. You're going to be okay, Gracie. And whenever we do look like our walks with Jesus are just kind of like Jesus's, maybe we're going to be alone, and that's okay. Maybe we are going to be judged wrongly, and they're not going to give us a chance to stick up and say, hey, this is why I am the way I am. Or maybe we're going to look a lot different than what the other people are looking like. Or maybe we're going to be smarter than what other people think that we are. And that comes across with me. Like, I'm in a job where it's like, you don't really use your brain power that much with it. And so people think I'm limited in that job. And there's some days I'm like, yeah, it's an easy day. I didn't really do a lot of work in my power to make me super tired. And so there's even some days where I believe that I'm not smart enough to continue God's journey with me. But then there's days where it's like I'm digging in so deep, and I'm like, there's no other person with a degree that can dig as deep as I can dig. Because it's like all of these things, just finding out, like looking at maps, and God's calling you, and he keeps on drawing you closer, because the more time that you spend with Jesus, the more it's going to make sense. And you're going to find out that your reputation might be different than what you think, just like Paul does. You might feel like you're alone, or that you might look a little bit hypocritical. But just like Paul and just like Jesus, they just come to tell you about Jesus and to love Jesus, and that it's different. But just speaking to people how Paul does, that was a really big part to me, because Paul stooped down. He was intimate with them. He wanted to connect with them. And there's so many times, this is my first time ever talking to a group of grown-ups about Jesus, because I'm like, oh, grown-ups just know everything already. And I shouldn't be a grown-up. I should still be at home getting my parents to tell me how to do my laundry. I shouldn't be in the dorms. But it's just when I get to talk to people my age, it's a little bit easier, because it's oh, we all don't know anything. But then as I start growing up and I see grown-ups, a lot of grown-ups don't know anything either. So it's a perfect opportunity to not limit yourself, because I just think that's really that came out of Acts 22 for me, was don't limit yourself and don't talk yourself out of things. And that's kind of big.
How you talk about Jesus and Paul kind of doing the same thing. I think that's big in the sense of, I don't know, when I think of Jesus, yeah, he had to do this, that's why he was brought here, right? God told him you have to. I mean, I'm sure at some point he could have said no, but that's not what he was brought for, right? Was to face the crowd, was to say all this stuff. Paul was called to do it, and he really, at any point, to me, in my mind, could have been I don't want to do this. How many meetings did he have to take? How many times did he have to go through this? Just in Acts alone, we talked about, just we're 21 in, how many times has he done this? And he was still all right, well, on to the next town, let's hope for the best.
Yeah.
If they take me out this time, he kept doing it. And when you think about that, Paul's more like me, right? Jesus is way up there. I'm not there, But Paul's all right, well, we're going to keep suffering. All right, Paul did it. Okay, God can do it too. Paul went through a lot worse than I did, so I can keep moving on, I can keep going. So seeing that Paul willingly put himself in those positions, to be like Jesus, to continue to preach it, and makes it easier for the normal guy to be hey, just keep suffering, we'll be all right, guys, we'll be all right, and we can keep pushing.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how you kind of you totally just skimmed. You said a statement there a couple minutes ago and you went past it, and I was like, whoa, we could sit in that. The more time you spend with Jesus, the more it will make sense. And so later in Acts, Paul talks about to the literal point where he says the Spirit is so strong inside of me that I cannot not do what he's telling me to do. He said Paul would prefer to die than to go against what he felt the Spirit was calling me to. He says that it is so strong within him that he's on a boat, literally on his way towards the end of the chapter. He's I have to. Everyone around him is do not go. I think that's when he goes to Jerusalem, right? And so they're do not go. Spoiler alert. They're do not go. You are going to die. And he's I will die if I do not do what the Spirit is telling me to do?
He's compelled.
And I'm so compelled is the word he's using. And so like how you were like, the more time you spend with Jesus, the more it'll make sense. And I was like, you went over that so fast, and I was like, that line could preach right there. Like that, like he spent so much time that he's like, I have to. And that's so crazy that Rafer's prayer 3 days ago was that we would take hold of what the Spirit is telling us, and that we would just know that it's facts and we would act upon it. And I'm like, that is so crazy that this chapter, and that's like what's really spoke to you about just doing what the Lord tells you to do, you know? And there was a couple at our house last night, and they were saying how he felt the Lord told him like to do something to act out in his faith. And he was like, God said, you are safer in war if I've called you there than sitting at home doing what I told you like not to do. You are safer in war if I've called you there than sitting on your couch not doing it. And like that's Paul too. Like Paul was like, let's go, I can't. It is what God has called me to do. It's that deep. And the more time, and if you want to get there, the more time you spend with Jesus, the more it'll make sense.
Yeah, back home at my church, like my youth pastor, he had told me like, how can you kill a dead man? You can't kill a dead man. We already denied ourselves. You know, everyone that's sitting in this room, I'm going to assume that we all like denied ourselves and picked up our cross to follow Jesus, and we're already dead to this earth. We're already living. We're already citizens of heaven. And so if we're going to continue to be scared to like not live out our faith, then we're already killing ourselves more, and we're not getting what God's telling us to do. We're not fulfilling, and we're not fulfilling what God's doing for us. And so even going back to like the time, so how I like to think about my faith is like it's going to be a little fire. So if I keep tending to that fire and like putting air on it, or like however you do a fire, I'm not too knowledgeable in fires, but however you do fires, like the more you like pay attention, I do know that part, the bigger it gets. But if I like go to my house and I pick up my phone and I don't focus on my fire, or if I go out to other things and I don't focus on my fire, then of course it's going to get smaller because nothing's getting done to it. And so back to like throwing out more time, our life is time. It's your job as adults now to focus how we're going to spend that time. So how we need to spend the time is focusing on what gives us what God's going to give us, which is joy, happiness, comfort, love, confidence, all that stuff. So if you're like just sitting there and you're not doing anything that's giving you the confidence or giving you the love or giving you the fearlessness or giving you like just a fearful of what, like just being fearful in God, like just respecting that authority and respecting that unknown that's just there, and like not putting God in a box. Because if we continue to put God in a box, or like, oh, he's gonna fix it, I'm okay, like that's just doing you a disservice, and that's giving the kingdom a disservice. Because imagine how many times you could really get to someone if you just look up and look around and not just what's in my face right now. I think that's big. So. Okay, that's it though.